Welcome in to another episode of DNVR Avalanche at the Rink
Pasta? At the Rink Pasta?
All right, that's I'm done for the day. Oh no. All right, we're redoing it. Welcome into DNVR Avalanche at the Rink podcast, hosted by Meghan, Angley, and Jesse Montano. We're back with another episode. We usually get to do these on the heels of a winning game, so it's going to be a little tougher.
Is this the first time we haven't?
It feels like it is.
I guess I'd have to go back and actually check. But, yeah, if it's not, this is one of just a few that we've done so far on the heels of a loss. But crazy week last week coming off of that.
That's probably going to be what dominates most of this conversation, too, is a postmortem wrapping up the trade deadline.
Yeah.
And looking ahead then at what this means for the state of this Avalanche team moving forward. And I definitely want your input, too, on how to drive the wrap-up deadline conversation, since there was a lot of content on Friday going over it, too. But I guess first thing I want to start with is, what's your biggest regret?
My biggest regret?
Yeah, no hard-hitting questions or anything, but what's your biggest regret of the deadline?
Okay, I was like, oh, my God. I was like, we may need to pause here so I can think about this.
When I was 5, one time.
Yeah.
When was the last time you cried?
I was like, well, shit. Actually, just the other day, and I'll tell you what it was later, because it's a funny, like, it's not actually a bad thing. But I was sitting there, I was like, I can't believe this got me to cry. What's my biggest regret, or like, what do I think the biggest regret of the deadline is?
No, yours.
Oh my goodness. I don't know. I feel like it's like an existential question.
Of the deadline, sorry. It's still
no.
okay.
I know. I still feel like it's an existential question. Do you have one in mind to give me an example here of what you mean by biggest regret of the
Not
deadline?
acquiring one more defensive piece.
Okay. All right.
Honestly,
I thought you meant like, Jesse, what did you want to do differently last week? I was like, I don't know, provide better coverage. I'm not sure.
Oh, shoot. Sorry. No, not on such a personal level.
You mean for the Avs?
Yes.
Gosh, Megan, I'll probably take yours as well. That was the one thing that I felt they needed. I said this on the watch along last week. And again, we're going to get into all of this, but you could sell me on not adding a forward. You know what I mean? If the dust settled and the Avs got, everything finished, and them not adding a forward, which obviously is what ended up happening, but I'm just saying, theoretically, a week ago, I could understand that. I could get there why you would say we feel comfortable with what we've got up front between JT Compher, Evan Rodriguez, Mikko Rantanen, Gabe Landeskog coming back, et cetera, et cetera. We feel good. You could sell me on that. Once Eric Johnson went down, I said you really need a defenseman. You added Jack Johnson, who I really did look at as a seventh. I really felt like you needed one. Then come to find out on trade deadline day, the Avs knew that Josh Manson's injury wasn't just going to be a quick day or two, maybe miss a game. You might have to miss this back-to-back. Nope, they knew it was a little bit more serious. They knew he was going to be out for an extended stretch here. I really did feel like they needed to add a defenseman. Again, we'll get into it. I don't necessarily think that is going to doom them purely on that fact that they didn't add one. But I really did feel like that was something that needed to be addressed that wasn't.
Where is your level of concern with the lack of acquisitions?
And relative to what, I guess, in terms of, do I think this is still a playoff team? How do I think it affected their chances to go back-to-back? I think this is absolutely still a playoff team. And Megan, I'll go one step further. I still think this is the best team in the West, as currently constructed. And I want to get more into that topic here in a little bit. But, look, I think they had a chance to really solidify their team and put themselves in a great position to get back to the Stanley Cup final and defend that title. I just think it got a lot harder for them. I think your margin for error just shrunk by a lot. Like I said, I still think this is, in my opinion, honestly, still pretty clearly the best team in the Western Conference at full health, assuming all things are, every team is fully healthy. I still think this is pretty, by a nice margin, the best team in the West. But they didn't do themselves any favors. They're going to be battling injuries. They didn't give themselves any reinforcements on that. Like I said, their margin for error is 0. You need to be fully healthy, and you need to be playing your best hockey. And if those two things if you're checking both those boxes, this is still a very good team that I think, Vegas still has it correct. This is the second odds-on favorite to win the Stanley Cup. I still agree with that. You have no room for missteps now, though.
I think some people wanted to know, because we knew definitively that Anaheim was a team that was at Avalanche games with scout representation, and people want to link then a couple players that the Avs might have been interested in. John Klingberg just being one of them, though I'm not sure that would have been the player or the sole player that they were even looking at if they were. And seeing too that Klingberg and Kulikov are both available deadline day, I think it's easy to feel some remorse that something didn't occur there. Why do you think nothing happened between Anaheim and Colorado?
So I'll be honest, Megan, I've done a little bit of digging, and I've actually gotten some good answers on the forward side. Why they didn't add a forward, why there were some of those guys out there on deadline day that they didn't add. I've gotten some answers that, to be honest with you, I feel pretty comfortable with. Answers that make sense. On the back end, I haven't, and now again, no one's out there like, oh my gosh, just burying the Avs or anything. But you look at what John Klingberg was moved for. Like you said, Dmitry Kulikov is sitting there. Kevin Shattenkirk doesn't even end up getting moved.
Right. And I don't know if Shattenkirk's name actually was in trade considerations properly. I know I would have liked that to be someone they key in.
Well, it was more of just, again, because I'm with you. I didn't explicitly hear his name at any point either, but God, that just
the fit is so obvious.
Right. And I mean, really, just Anaheim in general. That little lump of defensemen right there that we half their decor. It just made natural sense that would have been somewhere that you would have done some shopping. I have strong reason to believe that they absolutely did their homework on John Klingberg. I don't know why it never came together. We haven't gotten either Jared Bednar or Chris McFarland to say that Erik Johnson is done, that they're shutting him down. We actually just saw Erik Johnson last night at Ball Arena, no boot. He was in a boot last week. We saw him walking around. He was walking just fine yesterday. No boot.
The Altitude broadcast said he skated.
Did he?
Apparently. I want to confirm that somewhere else too, because it would have been prior to anybody.
Right.
There's a morning skate. We wouldn't have been able to know that ourselves. But that would be a really intriguing update if true.
Absolutely. And so, if that was what they said, that adds up with what I saw. But again, I haven't heard of him skating. I haven't seen him skating. If that was what was said on the Altitude broadcast, we'll go with that. All I can tell you definitively is no boot, walking totally fine with the injured and scratch. Or I guess the Avs not healthy enough to have any scratches right now. The glut of injured players that the Avs have at games right now. So I don't know. Maybe there's a sense there that it was like a hairline fracture and it just needed, it needs a few weeks off, and then he can be back at it here. And all right, you're essentially rolling into the playoffs this year with the same decor you had last year. I think you feel all right about that, right? Erik Johnson maybe a little bit more appropriately, on a third pairing, something like that. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe they know something that they aren't putting out there, that Erik Johnson is expected to be back maybe ahead of the playoffs. I also just found it really interesting that they had what we all thought was a couple LTIR options, and they dipped into neither of them. Again, just putting together the breadcrumbs here. I don't know, maybe we have overestimated these injuries, and the Avs are saying, nope, we feel good about what we've got on D because we believe that we're going to be healthy come second week of April. That's my only real thought as to why they wouldn't have added on defense, because if you don't feel very comfortable that Erik Johnson is coming back, I think it's obviously a glaring hole for this team.
And keying in on Klingberg and Kulikov just as specific examples, because I've seen those as players people cried out for the most and did experience that level of regret. What Klingberg ends up going for is still a pretty steep cost, and I don't believe there was any retention. His cap hit $7 million. They give up an American League defenseman, pretty experienced veteran-type player, and a defensive prospect that went pretty deep in the draft in his junior year in college, but still a defensive prospect. And it looks like a 2025 fourth-round pick. It's a pretty steep price, no retention, pretty high cap hit. That would have been a lot to ask for a John Klingberg whose season with Anaheim, and granted, it's with Anaheim, possession-wise has not been some of his best, that maybe that was too lofty of a price tag. The Avs, I don't know if they were interested in Klingberg, or if it would have been someone like Kulikov, who was a much more affordable cap hit, but still also didn't go for nothing.
See, I'll say I feel fairly confident in saying that the Avs were in on Klingberg, were at least interested in his services. Now again, how far down that conversation I haven't gotten specifically, but I do. I know the Avs were in on it. See, and I'll disagree with you. I don't think that's that steep of a price myself. I mean, now granted, I don't know much about those two prospects. They're two prospects that aren't in the Avalanche system. I'm just not super up on them. Do you know
the ones that ended up leaving?
Yeah.
Well, so one of them is an AHL journeyman type player.
Okay.
So I'm trying to think of what the equivalent would have been. It would have probably been someone.
Would you say like a
Brad Hunt light? Like
okay. So okay. Yep.
Maybe like
Liam O'Brien.
Maybe like a Liam O'Brien. And then the other one is an interesting one because he's having actually a pretty good college season, but he was a 6th round pick in 2018. And so one is a right shot, the AHL journeyman type, so kind of a coveted good stylistic difference there just to get an option on the right side. The other one is a left-hand shot, but that's the one that is having a pretty good college season. And so I wouldn't value him as like a Sean Barron's type because he did go quite a bit later, but maybe like a college free agent Wyatt Ahmet type.
Okay, all right, yeah. So like I look at that, and again, if you're talking a player, Liam O'Brien, Brad Hunt-esque, I mean, that's a guy that Anaheim can plug into their lineup for the rest of this year if they want to, keep losing games for Connor Bedard. So that's a player that makes sense. Look, you're taking an upside swing. Hey, we think this guy's having a good year. We think that maybe this could be a bit of a late bloomer. Again, like I guess I just kind of look at that, and I'm saying that if there had to be something beyond the cost, I guess is what I'll say. Not necessarily that I disagree that it's not too much pay, because that is the other thing that you have to keep in mind. Through all of the John Klingberg conversation, I felt he would have made sense in Colorado. Statistically and analytically, he's having like one of the worst defensive seasons like ever.
And honestly, it's just kind of true of Anaheim's defensemen generally. So is Dmitry Kulikov.
Right. And that's where you have to, like you said a minute ago, Megan, like you have to take it with a grain of salt when you're talking about these Anaheim defensemen right now, because they were all bad. And that Anaheim team, I don't know if you've looked at league-wide goal differential recently.
It's the worst,
by a lot. Like there's bottom feeder teams, a steep fall off, and then you're at Anaheim. Even with as well as John Gibson has played, I think he went 4 straight games seeing 50 shots or more, and like he's totally held his own. Like it's just a barrage on net every single night in Anaheim. There's no defense being played there. So you have to take that with a little bit of a grain of salt. That is my only thought with the John Klingberg thing. The Avs prioritize team defense over almost everything. This team, everything starts with a strong team defensive effort. And I don't know, maybe it was just one of those things where, and I'm theorizing here. Maybe it was hey, we're in this for, and again, I don't know this, I'm just purely for happy feelings. We're in this conversation for a fourth and Sampo Ranta. You know what I mean? Just for the sake of the argument. And Anaheim comes back and like, well, we just got an offer from Minnesota for a fourth, a Sampo Ranta type guy, college defenseman, and they're willing to throw this in. And maybe that was just where the Avs said, you know what? We were going to do this on like a, hey, doesn't cost us much, whatever. We can add a decent defenseman to our back end. You want us to up the ante? We're not upping the ante for a guy that we don't feel super comfortable fits our system great.
I actually wonder, too, if it is specific to position that the Avs have just fewer options to give up defensively, even in their own depth, that they just couldn't make that offer. Like, maybe there was a lot of forward options being shopped, like Sampo Ranta, but maybe it was as specific as if Anaheim's giving up Klingberg, they want defensemen coming back in return, and they just don't have a lot of those running around now.
That's another great,
Drew Helleson, Justin Barron, that was last deadline.
Right, and honestly, I would have felt like both of those guys would have been an overpay for a John Klingberg, and that's a great point, Megan. Yeah, maybe it was all things were equal in these offers. Anaheim liked the defenseman mid-level prospect instead of the forward mid-level prospect. You know what I mean? And I just think that given what Chris McFarland talked to us about, and I'm actually going to have Yah here at some point in this pod, we're going to drop in the entire Chris McFarland trade deadline availability so that people can hear directly from him, his answers. Megan, you and I were laughing. C-Mac's a great dude. Really enjoyed getting to know him a little bit this year and being able to talk with him. And, he's been pulling a lot of strings behind the scenes of the Avs front office for several years now. So it's been nice to get to know him a little bit more. He's very calculated. He's very John Cooper-esque to me. Everything he says a lot and nothing at the same time.
I love that you brought up John Cooper, but keep going.
Where it's just like you sit there and you listen to them and it's like, wow, yep. Wow, that's so insightful, so great. You go back and listen to it, it's like, yo, this guy gave us nothing. He answered absolutely nothing, but he sounded eloquent doing all of it. But so that people can hear from him, that's honestly my guess, Megan. I just think the Avs said we're not going to do bidding wars this year. We did bidding wars last year, and it cost us a lot. We need a year to splash of cold water on the face. We made our fringe moves. We feel good about where we're at on the whole. We're going to pump the brakes this year, and we're not going to get into these outrageous bidding wars this year. The Avs are in a window here. I don't want to necessarily dump out all of this conversation on the table right now because I think we're still getting into it with the forward side of things. But, I think fans see a lot of the moves that are being made this year and are wondering why the Avs aren't doing that. Why couldn't the Avs get in on it? It seems like such a missed opportunity. And I think you do have to remember the Avs spent a lot of assets last year. And teams like Boston, teams like Toronto didn't. We've seen other teams nibble around the edges. And then we've also seen other teams make, because there has been, it seems like, one big name available at the deadline the last number of years. Wherever that big name has gotten moved has not had any postseason success recently. Tampa has won their 2 Stanley Cups on the back of fringe moves. The Avs won their Stanley Cup last year on the back of fringe moves. Arturi Lehkonen top 6 if you want to stretch that one. But I made the assertion the other day. At the time, a lot of people were not happy with that Arturi Lehkonen price. And it was because he wasn't considered to be a top tier in that top tier of players at the time. We all talked about it as like, wow, what a great stylistic fit. We see why the Avs are doing this, and it made a lot of sense. But that really was a pickup that pleased the analytics crowd and not so much the general fan base crowd. So that's how teams this time of year find success. It's about filling in the gaps of where they need to. There's a reason everyone's looking at, with all the acquisitions that Toronto made, people have big question marks there because there was so much turnover. is that going to work? You're essentially starting over with a third of your roster in terms of getting them to gel and getting them to the point where they were at. So, the Avs spent a bit last year. I don't think it's that unreasonable for them to say, we're going to take a year and just see what we've got still. We still feel decent about where we're at. And again, I think there's disappointing things about that, and we'll get into it, but I just think that was what the Avs said. We got into bidding wars last year. It cost us our top 2 defensive prospects and a first-round pick, more second-round picks. We're not going to get into the bidding wars last year. Think about it. Darcy Kemper, preseason, bidding war. The Avs paid more than they wanted to. Josh Manson, there were several teams in there for their services, for his services. They ended up paying Drew Hellison. Arturi Lehkonen, that price definitely got driven up. Cost you your top defensive prospect who had seen an NHL game, and it cost you a first-round pick. The Avs paid a lot last year. I don't think it's that unreasonable to expect them to say we're not going to drive the price up. We'll make our offer. If you don't like the offer, we'll move on.
And hearing that they were in on this deadline 5 minutes until it closed makes me think that it was down to the wire, that a lot of options were considered and they didn't just sit back and do nothing. It just, the offer didn't make sense or wasn't good enough. And that's something too when we play the Chris McFarland clip that gets addressed. But the At the Rink written piece is up, and there's a lot more information on a couple sides of this because you bring up John Cooper and Tampa, and I write about the ways in which Tampa handled this deadline and recent deadlines, and also talk a little bit about the coaching parallels between Bednar and Cooper, which is funny, but it is because Tampa is in many ways a blueprint for a team that is able to string together championship caliber hockey back to back, not just in winning titles, but also being competitive enough to get there. And that's what the Avs are looking to do as well. And Tampa has given up far and away a lot more to be in the position that they are in. They almost have no picks left. And the type of player that they're seeking out deadline after deadline is an interesting caliber player. It's a like a Lars Eller. It's like a Logan O'Connor. It's Brandon Hagel better. Nick Paul, Goudreau, we talked about the Tanner Jeannot is where it started to get a little off the rails for us, but there's something very specific that they're doing that Colorado isn't doing so differently.
Well, and Megan, like it's funny because you bring up, I think we'll get into Lars Eller. Just the amount of people that have been losing their mind in my mentions about the cost of Lars Eller. What, the 2025 second? Let me repeat that. 2025 second round draft pick. People are losing their mind. Tampa Bay Lightning paid 2 first-round picks for Brandon Hagel a couple seasons ago. They paid out the nose for Nick Paul last year. Do you think they have any regrets about doing any of that? No. They understand the Tampa Bay Lightning, and to a lesser extent, because they haven't had the same success as Tampa, to a lesser extent the Vegas Golden Knights, those are 2 teams that have kind of figured out, spend the assets you need to spend if you like the player. If you really like the player, spend the assets. And I think that was Colorado's thing this year. I think they really liked Lars Eller. They spent the asset. They were fine with a couple of the other guys that were out there. And so they said, well, we're not going to do that. We're going to wait and save these assets for guys that we really like, whether it be in the summer or at next year's deadline. Because this team is still, like, the Avs window is wide open. You're not even remotely talking about this Stanley Cup window shutting on them. The blueprint for sustained success in the NHL for the last 15 to 20 years at this point has been keep a strong core and then add around the edges. And I think that's kind of where you're going with Tampa. Tampa, it's been now since the mid-2010s, it's been Vasilevsky, it's been Stamkos, it's been Hedman, it's been Kucherov. That has been their core that they've said, as long as we have this and we can add around the outside, we don't feel like we need another huge pickup. We can just keep adding around the outside because we believe in our style of play and we believe in our core and our leaders. And look where it's gotten them. And I think you're right. They are a huge inspiration for the Avs.
I think these are teams, too, that look to one another to draw inspiration, because I think that Tampa wanting to have some of the best third and fourth lines in the league is no accident. I think what the Avs were able to do with their depth last year's playoffs demonstrated the importance of depth and why something like Lars Eller, which feels like you paid a premium, might explain it.
Yeah. It's the heartbeat of that Avs team last year was the defense. It was how dynamic those three pairings were in the playoffs that gave teams fits. That was first and foremost. If you go back and rewatch all four of those series, it started with the defense and it ended with the depth. The Stars filled in the in-between. Nobody could hang with the Avs' third and fourth lines. The Avs had the best third and fourth lines in hockey last year going into the playoffs, and that was what just chewed teams up. Nashville had no answer top to bottom. That series was a blowout. St. Louis gave the Avs in the West the best series because they had the scoring depth. They were able to hang a bit. That was where the Avs defense really was the difference maker in that series, right? You got in the Western Conference Final, Edmonton, their top lines couldn't even hang. You know, Connor McDavid could only do so much by himself. Leon Draisaitl was having to play standing still, and he did it very admirably. But yeah, you got outside of that top six, and Edmonton had zero answer for what the Avs were doing. And then to your point, yeah, Tampa, they had Nick Paul and Andre Palat, and they were hanging in there. But it was the third and fourth lines that just were way too much. They overwhelmed, and I think you're 100% spot on. Tampa went and made the adjustments this year, and they said, well, we're not going to get out-depthed again. And that's part of the reason why I think it's a nightmare that Toronto's going to pull them in the first round. I think Toronto's done a lot to make themselves better, but you're now going up against a Tampa team that said, we're going to focus on our depth. And I think that's why the Avs prioritized that at this year's deadline. CMAC said, we wanted center depth. We weren't looking at first line, second line, third line, fourth line. We wanted center depth, and they added Lars Eller, and I think that's why they're trying to run back the blueprint from last year.
There's a couple interesting things you said there, and one is not to key in too much on the Tanner Jeannot thing, but he was a piece of Nashville's forward group in playoffs that Tampa could get a glimpse of how this young player competes when the spotlight gets a little bit brighter. And Nashville, just a tough series for them, generally speaking. Yeah. But to see a player in his rookie season hang the way that he did against what would become the Stanley Cup champions, I think probably piqued their interest to why they would want a Tanner Jeannot then on their roster going forward for the playoffs this year. Tampa's interest in him, that is.
Well, and so what ended up being the total price? Was it?
It's like 5 assets, right?
I thought it was actually 6. I thought it was a player and 5 picks.
Okay, it was definitely Cal Foote. We know that much.
Yes, that's right. Yep.
But then the picks 4 or 5.
Yep. So
picks.
Actually, yep. Now I forgot it was Cal Foote, a first, a second, and then in this year's draft, a third, a fourth, and a fifth.
I think that's right.
Here's my theory with it, Megan, and you're gonna hate me for this. I agree with their thought process. I think 6 assets is wild. If it was just the picks, I would actually really like this deal. Adding in Cal Foote, who I think is a good defenseman, has the potential to be very good, but I think he's good. I don't think he's great. Draft picks are lottery tickets. Tampa, I think, said we can cash in these lottery tickets for a young player and kind of reset the age of our next wave. You added Tanner Jeannot, who had a great rookie year last year. A lot of people thought he should have been in consideration for the Calder. He's had a drop off a bit this year, but Tampa just got younger, and they just cashed in a third, fourth, fifth, the first and second. Yeah, I know those are a little bit higher valued, a little bit higher odds of that turning out to be a player, but they basically said, we're not going to wait for these picks. We're going to get a second-year player who we know is good and who we have proof, like you just said, he can hang in a playoff series against a very good team. We're going to cash in these future hopefuls for one that we know is a known quantity right now. And I was actually told by some players this week, just talking to different guys around the NHL, that is a prevailing thought process right now behind the scenes. I'm telling you that right now. Contending teams are looking at this saying, why are we going to wait for these draft picks to develop when we can cash them in for guys right now? And I think you are going to start to see maybe not 6 assets for young players, but I think this may be a trend. Hey, you're a team whose window doesn't really line up with this young kid. Let us take him off your hands now. You can maximize your return. And look, Nashville, Tanner Jeannot is not going to be any good for you with what you're trying to do. Let us take him off your hands, take these lottery tickets, see if you can get something to line up a little bit better with when you are going to be competitive. And like I said, I'll tell you this right now. I think players agree with that on these contending teams. I don't care about our picks. We want players who can play. And if you can get a player who can play and get a player that's in his early 20s, late teens even, who's to argue with that?
So I was thinking about how Tanner Jeannot is 25, but it's
Second
still
year player.
true.
Second year
It's
player.
still
Yeah,
true. He's
100%.
still early in his career, and his trajectory is not so different from players they've targeted before that become incredibly reliable depth players that are incredibly difficult to play against. But I'm also thinking about how you talked about depth down the middle.
Yep.
And the fact that Ben Meyers is still an Avalanche player.
Yes. Yep.
That is not to be understated. That is a prospect in some ways,
Yep.
high level, NHL ready right now in many ways, just a little bit tough to find his fit right now on this championship
this
caliber
team,
team. But Ben Meyers remains an Av moving forward. And so there's different iterations of the Avs next year and the year after that. Ben Meyers still an Av, at least next year. And I think that's where you compare then to how Tampa handled this deadline, where things start to really differentiate. Foodie is still an Av. Sampo Ranta is still an Av. Oscar Olausson is still an Av. They have a player now in Lars Eller that is meant to make this team more competitive this year, but they also remain pretty competitive future years moving forward because Ben Meyers is still an Av.
Well, so and it's for what you just said and what we were just talking about with Tanner Jeannot, and again, it's something that a theme that I do think we will start to see. I actually think the Avs are the inspiration for some of this. Not necessarily in spending draft picks, but look, it's no secret. You can go to any website, any list, any whatever. The Avs have not been any good at developing players past the first round. The Avs have, in my opinion, been like one of the best first-round drafting teams of the last 10 years. There are a lot of first-round picks that have made it to the NHL or have, been used to bring in other assets. The Avs have done nothing beyond the first round for the most part. But what they've been fantastic about is their pro scouting, finding college free agents, players from Europe, players on the waiver wire that fill in all those gaps in the way that you want later round picks to. Players developing into high-end players beyond the second round is rare. It's rare. It's why those players are talked about in terms of, Joe Pavelski, 7th round pick, big-time impact player, top 6 guy. The majority, obviously there's plenty of them out there, but the vast majority, if you're talking 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th round picks, you're talking middle to bottom of your lineup usually is kind of a cap, right? Bringing in guys like Ben Meyers, a few years ago, Alexander Kerfoot, Matt Nieto. Who was the other one last year that went great? Abe Kubel. They've done a really good job of finding these guys around the edge and saying, hey, these are guys that fit our system, and we think we can get them to play within our structure at a higher level than they were before. And again, I think that's kind of what you're seeing with Tampa. Yeah, they've used 6 assets to do it instead of finding the freebies here and there, but they're saying there's a young player, second-year guy who fits what we do well, and like you said, he does what we want our bottom 6 guys to do, which is just be nasty to play against. Big body, like you said, he's 25, so he's not a traditional sophomore for the NHL.
They might prefer that, though.
Right.
More matured, grown into his body.
More filled out. Absolutely, Megan. And again, it's an unconventional way to get your depth without waiting on these draft picks that you hope turn out. We're we both, I think very highly of Jean-Luc Foudy. I think that dude's got an NHL career he's staring down. But he's got to get there still. You know what I mean? Tampa essentially just said, yeah, we're not going to wait for that. We're just going to cash in for a guy that we know can. And like I said, different guys around the NHL this last week, just different people I've reached out to. I wouldn't be surprised if that's something that you see happen a little bit more with Nashville kind of setting the blueprint for, hey, if you want a young player that, yeah, is maybe a little bit better than we would hope right now, given our window or our hopeful window in a couple of years, he's up for grabs if you're willing to pay enough. And I think you might see teams a couple more of those deals over the next few years.
And looking at the forward side of things, too, because you did write about Max Domi, who is another one people look to, available on deadline day.
Yep.
What happened? Were the Avs ever in on him? You talk about it in the At the Rink piece, but I wanted to talk about it here, too.
Yep.
It sounds like, from your view, it came down to a stylistic fit. Is that correct?
Yep. And some things that I've just had some conversations about. Max Domi specifically. Look, I'm not going to go as far as say the players didn't want him there. I am not going to say that. Especially when it comes to the person side, I have not been given any reason to believe that there were anybody that thought he wouldn't have fit in the locker room.
Right.
I'm not under that impression at all. What I am under the impression of is that players, coaches, management, multiple people, I don't know, at different levels, there was just a prevailing conversation of this guy is way too north-south, straight line, up and down. Like we said earlier, this is a team that focuses on team defense. That is what this whole system, last year's Stanley Cup, the success that they've had under Jared Bednar, all of that is built on strong team defense and a defensive system. And I just think there was pretty strong belief relatively early on. I don't think the Avs were in on Max Domi these last few days. I'd be willing to bet they checked in on him, especially they did a deal with Chicago. They make the move for Jack Johnson. You know that was at least asked, what's the price? And I think you can look at the fact that Max Domi essentially went for the same thing that Lars Eller did. Yeah, you're throwing in a nothing prospect in there. Prospect swap. I think the Avs said, we are comfortable spending that asset on Lars Eller because we think he does well what everyone that we've brought in on these kind of bargain situations over the last few years does well. He fits our system. He plays the type of way that we want him to play. We're comfortable with that asset here. We are not comfortable with that asset for a guy that at different levels of this organization, we don't necessarily feel fits our identity. And that's where I think it broke down on Max Domi. Look, you can think he's a better player. I maybe even tend to agree with you on that. He brings the grit. He plays real hard along the wall. Hard to play against, kind of a pest. But I think the ultimate prevailing theory was he's too north-south.
The goaltender swap that happens there, I think, is especially interesting because the pick is very comparable to Lars Eller, but then it's honestly that goaltending piece in the same way with Klingberg. We talk about what the Avs had to give up positionally if they were really seeking a defenseman there. If Chicago was really seeking, because what they get is Khudobin. They get an NHL, AHL now caliber goaltender that has played NHL games, probably better suited for the American League now.
Played in the Stanley Cup final in the bubble.
Exactly. He's a trusted goaltender, honestly, similar to the tune of Keith Kincaid.
Yep.
Not quite to that. Like, Khudobin, I think, would be more trusted there.
Yeah.
But I actually wondered, was that ever in consideration? Is Keith Kincaid, had he ever been considered
flipped or
to be flipped? Because that's the type of goaltender they were seeking out very specifically. Because what they get in return, what Dallas gets, is a struggling ECHL, AHL goaltender, 25 years old. So, still young in prospect territory, hasn't quite even solidified an American League career. So, it's interesting. I think Dallas is yeah, we'll take that and we'll give you Khudobin. Was Chicago really seeking that specific of a goaltender?
I don't think so. I just think it was one of those things where Chicago probably just wanted a little bit more. Because look, here's my thing with the Lars Eller 2025 second. To me, that's a free player, Megan. Lars Eller, as far as I'm concerned, the Avs got a free player. You're talking about a guy. I did some polling amongst just people in the NHL. 2025, not first round pick. What's the earliest you're seeing this guy? And I wrote about it. And basically what I was told, if you're not getting the one every other year second rounder that pops, late bloomer, pops in his draft plus 1 year, and is knocking on the door of your roster, his D+2 year, that player isn't even getting a sniff at the NHL roster for at least 2 full seasons. Then that third year after that, he's maybe jockeying for position at a camp. Maybe it's a call-up, and that's where you hope he sticks. You're talking 6 to 7 years out. 2030 by the time that player can hopefully contribute to your NHL roster. And if not your NHL roster, you're hoping that he's somewhere within your organization at that point. So for me, the pick is almost kind of whatever. I wouldn't be surprised. Is Anton Khudobin even playing?
It's a good question.
Because I actually wouldn't be surprised if Chicago used him.
I could see it.
I actually, when I saw that one, if he's playing, I'm going to look it up right
now. I'm second guessing, was there some sort of...
Well, I almost even wonder if it's just like a...
injury.
Hey, send him here. That's a veteran guy. I've heard everyone loves Anton Khudobin in the room. Send him here. We'll let him play in the NHL. He'll be good for the young guys. Yeah. No, he's been
They're
playing.
using him.
Oh, God, he's had an $8.99 AHL goalie this year. Not great.
Is he playing in Chicago?
He's listed as Rockford Ice Hogs.
Okay.
So we'll see.
Cool.
But that was kind of my thought process. Can you throw us a little sweetener on this? Can you get us a nice glue guy for our room? How about Anton Khudobin? He can play some games for you. Let's see, when's his... Yeah, last year of his deal. So, really, I don't know. The goalie swap is interesting. But yeah, I really do think that's what it was the Avs said, Lars Eller fits what we do, even though he's maybe not quite as raw talented as a Max Domi. We like what he does better for us.
I do think the Avs, when they have to choose between offensive upside and reliability defensively, they'll lean defensively.
I agree.
And I think it's because there's trust in top stars to contribute offensively as needed. And then there's a lack of trust and a necessity for the team defense, which has brought them success, where they just can't take a gamble on that. I think the stylistic fit is where things fell through with Domi as well.
Yeah.
I don't know that if they were going to take a swing at a forward, there are still other players I would have liked better in Colorado sooner than that, even though it's hard to look that he's available deadline day.
Yeah, yep. And Megan, I think it's interesting that Max Domi was available on deadline day.
I do too.
Again, I'm not saying this based off of anything that I was told or, that people don't like him or I haven't heard any of that. I think it's interesting that with all the moves, all the high-profile players we saw moved ahead of the deadline this year, that Max Domi was still floating out there on deadline day and then gets moved for what Lars Eller costs. Here's the other part of this that everyone very quickly wants to go to. The Avs overpaid for Eller. Can you believe that Max Domi only costs that much? And no one's asking, why did Max Domi cost the same amount as Lars Eller? Why are we so... you can see the point totals, yeah. This is also Max Domi's fifth team. He just keeps signing one-year deals and getting flipped at the deadline. What is it? And I'm asking genuinely. Again, we openly advocated for the Avs to bring in Max Domi. So I'm not... This isn't me trying to slam Max Domi and say the Avs made the better deal by getting Lars Eller. I'm not saying that at all. But at a certain point, you do have to step back and go, did the Avs overpay for Lars Eller because of what Max Domi got? Or are we maybe just overvaluing what Max Domi is worth And when you look at the last several years of his career, you maybe have to stop and go, well, hold on. Maybe we're overvaluing what Max Domi is worth.
Maybe, too. Maybe we weren't the only ones who overvalued him, and maybe Chicago turned down deals and many fell through. And then they reached deadline day and said, oh, shucks.
Right.
Perhaps we've overvalued
Perhaps
Domi.
we held on a little bit too long because he's in the middle of a 50-point season and, yada, yada, yada.
They didn't retain, right?
They did.
Okay.
But it's not very much money, and it's only for a couple more months. So
Okay.
yeah. But I mean, honestly, Meghan, I take that back. He had a 72-point year the first year in Montreal. But I mean, like, his career has just been so up and down. He's a 18-goal, 52-point guy his rookie year. Back-to-back 9-goal seasons after that. Gets flipped from Arizona, goes to Montreal, has a huge season. 28 goals, 72 points in 18-19. Lasts one more year in Montreal. 17 goals for 44 points. Next year, moves on to Columbus. 9 goals, back-to-back 9-goal seasons again. The second season only hitting 24 points. Then his last year in Columbus, 9 goals. He was that second 9-goal season. Flipped to Carolina at the deadline. Did nothing in the playoffs. He was all right. Goes to Chicago this summer. Has another kind of resurgent season. Flipped at the deadline. And he actually didn't get a point the other night. We all thought he did. They took it away from him. So Max Domi's just a hard player to evaluate because, like I said, the kind of scouting report that I got on him, watering it down, way too north-south. Isn't committed enough to playing in his own end. And then you look at the inconsistencies in the production, and it's just hard to spend a lot of assets on a guy that you have no idea what you're going to get.
It's interesting. It's not a fair comparison, but it sounds like the Avs already have something of Max Domi and Alex Galchenyuk. They took a gamble on him.
I don't think that's that unfair of a comparison at
and
all.
Like, to be fair, Max Domi's in the NHL right now.
Sure, 100%.
Having a good season.
Yeah, very good.
So that's why I don't want to get carried away with this comparison. But the inconsistencies,
right.
The reputation that gives teams pause, even though I want to be clear that Alex Galchenyuk, everything I've heard about him and his time here in Colorado is hands-on, completely bought in to what they want him to do. So there's nothing attitudinally going wrong with Galchenyuk here. He's very well liked, and he's doing a lot of the hard work that's being asked of him. But
Meghan,
he carried a reputation before getting here that gave people pause.
I don't think that's that crazy of a comparison at all. The last couple of years, the wheels have definitely come off a little bit harder for Galchenyuk. But, I mean, if you look, again, he touches 30 goals in 15-16, stays near right near 20. 17 goals in 61 games the following year, 20-goal season the next year, 19 goals. And then the steep decline came. He had a decent stretch with the Maple Leafs, 12 points in 26 games. 21 points in 60 games last year with the Coyotes. Like, again, it's definitely been a harder fall off for Galchenyuk, but I don't think that's that crazy of a comparison because what is that you have heard this year, coming into this year about Galchenyuk? When the Avs got their hands on him, what was it that you were told?
It was the defensive liability. Like, one, is he even still the 30-goal scorer?
Right.
But two, it was the defensive liability. And honestly, I think that's what might give Colorado pause from looking at Domi is we just don't have the time to sharpen that side of his game.
At this time of year.
At this time of year.
I wouldn't necessarily be shocked, and I'm not saying the Avs would do this, but Max Domi is a UFA this summer. If the Avs wouldn't made that move then, it would make so much sense to me for what you just said. We're going to spend 8 months getting you to where we need to be. Where we need you to be. That's what we're going to spend the next 8 months doing. We don't have 8 months right now. You need Max Domi to get dropped in your lineup and be good to go today. 2 weeks. You know what I mean? You need to get on the same page with this team in 2 weeks, and the Avs, I think, maybe just felt there was too much legwork to be done there.
And even looking at Galchenyuk, there's a reason he hasn't made another NHL game appearance, and that Ben Meyers is who they reliably call up there in his place. I don't think it's because they have given up on him entirely. He's lighting up the American League now while healthy.
He's having a fantastic year.
He's really thriving here in Colorado. It's just he's not what they need him to be this season.
Well, and I think the injury maybe was a bit of a setback too, because that's a guy,
100%.
Megan, that you and I think we mentioned, I don't remember if it was on the pod or not, but you and I mentioned that a few weeks ago, like, wait. Is Galchenyuk in this mix at all? Like, is that a fringe ad that you could make? You know, once he gets healthy, if you feel like his defensive game has taken some serious strides, I don't know. Could that be your Max Domi, middle six, drop him on the wing and see what happens?
I actually love that angle, and I don't want to get carried away with the projection of it, but it's better than taking a swing at somebody not in the Avs organization system right now at the deadline because they'd be dropped in anew. So he's been playing in Loveland where they execute systems so similarly that it would make a lot more sense.
And now that I say that, and again, I think the answer probably still is Max Domi when it's all said and done, but
sure.
Gosh, do you feel that much worse if it ends up being a called up Alex Galchenyuk in 3 weeks than it would a Max Domi? Like, in terms of I feel like they've got the same, you don't really know what you're going to get factor. And I feel like Alex Galchenyuk has the same odds to, hit the NHL roster and just click as Max Domi does. Again, it's probably still Max Domi when the chips are down, but is the gap that big?
I don't know that it's so huge. And I think, too, the Avs look at it like we took our gamble on Galchenyuk. Yeah. So we don't want to take too many risks here in Domi as well. Yeah. So I think, too, it's even more simple than that. There are a lot of comparisons I think you could absolutely draw. So we have 10 minutes.
Yep.
What should we do? Let me...
Oh, I was laughing and then I started yawning. Oh my gosh.
You were dying.
No, I was a little bit of both. What should we do was a hilarious question, and then a yawn attacked me halfway through.
I say that only because there are several topics. I loved keying in on what Toronto has done at this deadline. Yeah. However, I don't know if that...
I'll just say this. I loved it. I loved what Toronto did purely with the concept of Kyle Dubas. I tweeted this last week, so I don't want to make it sound like this is an original thought again for me. Kyle Dubas is managing for his job right now. He's in the last year of his deal. Sheldon Keefe, the last year of his deal. If they don't make it out of the first round, those two are done. It's not like malicious. You've had an elite core for years. You've made big moves. You've brought in the goal. You've done everything you can. It's never worked. This is truly it. Kyle Dubas is like, I'm leaving nothing in the cupboards here. If this is my way out, I'm taking everything with me, and I'm throwing everything I can at this team. Like I said, and like we actually mentioned just a minute ago, the only thing that will ultimately judge how successful that was is time. And if overturning your roster to that extent ultimately ends up working out for them, we'll only find out come playoff time. It's a shame they're going to pull Tampa again. But look, I love the acquisition of Ryan O'Reilly. You hope he's not
the hand
hurt long term. My issue with the Maple Leafs had always been they were too samey. Lines 1 through 4, it was the same guy that marqueed every line. Ryan O'Reilly gives you something different. It's part of the reason why I didn't fully understand the John Tavares thing, why they made such a huge deal out of going to get him last year. It's like, yeah, you've got high-end scoring centers. You've got high-end playmaking guys down the middle. You don't need another one. It's part of the reason why Nazem Kadri got moved from there. They had too many of that guy. I talk about it at the rink. The Avs flipped Tyson Jost for Nico Sturm last year. There was a lot of people who were confused by that move because everyone was essentially saying, like, you gave so much skill away for a guy that's like basically just a bump and grinder on your fourth line. But that was very intentional. We know we're giving away the skill. We want someone who's harder to play against on the wall. Not that Jost doesn't work hard below the goal line and stuff. But I don't think anybody can argue that Nico Sturm gave them a different element than what Tyson Jost brought. And I also don't think that of that original, frat line, Comfer, Jost, Kerfoot, the one that stuck and got his name on the cup was JT Comfort. Jost and Kerfoot were skill, finesse, speed guys. They wanted to be harder to play against. And I thought Ryan O'Reilly was finally, and now it's obviously at the top of their lineup, but it's finally something different. William Nylander, Mitch Marner, Austin Matthews, those dudes are all awesome. They're all awesome. They're all so fun to watch. Austin Matthews is an elite goal scorer. It's great. It's awesome. They're all different versions of the same dude. Ryan O'Reilly gives them something different. They bolster the back end a bit. Question marks in net still. We'll see if it works out. I don't know if I still don't know if they've got enough to get it done, but I think they've put themselves in a better position to get over the line, the finish line this year than they ever have.
And I think they need to get out of the first round, and I think they've primed themselves to do that. I like the addition of Luke Shen. They also recoup some of the picks that they give up in the moves that they make. I also thought that they had a terrific deadline, but it's interesting too because you mentioned that Colorado really wasn't in a position to have that kind of deadline either in the way that Toronto was. I don't think the Avs should have taken quite such big swings because it does change the lineup a lot, and they have worked hard to cultivate this group. The culture here is based on the personnel too, so too many changes to Colorado, for example, I think would disrupt the biosystem. That is the Colorado Avalanche. And I think that that's where they take a little bit of risk in Toronto because you look at an O'Reilly injury and you're like, shucks, a lot of their success hinges on this one guy because he has fit in so well there. He has been such a big missing piece. I like when the team of Colorado is in a position where they're looking for more fringe additions because you have the hole at 2C is still a problem.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on that, I guess? This is where Chris McFarland specifically said, I think we have the personnel to get it done. Here.
I do. And the team that we left out earlier when we were talking about sustained success, and I think it's because the reputation of it was tainted a bit in the last 2 years. But just for 30 seconds, we'll forget about that horrific side of it that should never be forgotten about. But in terms of the hockey decisions, Chicago went every other year for 6 years winning the Cup. And they would have guys leave that would sometimes leave holes and things like that, but they found a way that, again, it was kind of communal buy-in. These guys would come in. How are they getting this kind of performance out of it? I feel for this year, less than 6 months removed from a Stanley Cup championship for the Avs. A little bit more than 6 months. You're fine. You have the personnel to do it. You don't have the one. You got Mikko Rantanen. You hopefully got Gabe Landeskog coming back. You got Evan Rodriguez. You got JT Compher. You can spot duty it for this year. That is my other thing. You look at what happened in the East. Boston, New York, Toronto. What do those teams do now for the next 2 to 3 deadlines? They spent it. They used every asset they have. Every high asset they have. I think the Avs are playing the long game here. We feel good. We feel, as this roster is currently constructed, we can still compete. We can still compete, and we think we even have the horses to win another Stanley Cup because we've now done it. We understand what it takes, how to, in those later rounds, how to prepare your body and how to pace yourself. We think that if we can get in, we can do some damage, and we could potentially even win another one. And if not, we'll take another swing next year because we didn't move on from Sean Behrens. We didn't move on from Jean-Luc Foudy. We held on to our first-round picks over the next couple of years. And as the NHL just proved, next year, you'll get another second-round pick loaded up for 4 years down the road. So just deal that. We had 2026 picks flying around this year. Like, you know what I mean? Like, you'll get some assets back just automatically. You held on to some of your higher-end prospects. The Avs are in the middle of a several-year-long window here. Boston won a Stanley Cup, I believe it was in 2011. And they're the odds-on favorite to do it this year again with roughly the same core. If the Avs do this right, they've got a long window ahead of them. I get fans could have been disappointed this year with the lack of moves, But understand that this is a long game here. And this Avs team is still a very good team. If you talk to most people around the NHL, this is still considered to be the team to beat out west. Not Avs fans on Twitter. Most people around the league, other team employees, other players, other media from other cities still view Colorado as a team to beat. I think the Avs said, we're still the team to beat. We're fine, standing pat a little bit this year. The Avs made a lot of depth moves leading up to this deadline. We'll stand pat on the big fish, see if we can make some cause some damage, and then come back at it next year, go into this summer with some of those assets. And if we want to really reload up next year and go for it again, guess what? We can do that.
I think the Avs have set such a high standard that the fan base holds them to.
Yep.
And it is a fair call out that outside of the Avs organization, other organizations, players, behind the front office management, views the Avalanche as the threat and as the team to beat. I think it's an important call out because it doesn't always feel that way from inside the house.
Yeah.
But the Avs are still the team to beat.
Yeah.
And people are counting on some players getting healthy. Like, it's hard to say who and exactly when, but they're going to get healthier than they are even right now.
Yep.
And I think that's a great place to end the show.
I think so. Yeah.
All right, you guys. DNVR Avalanche at the Rink podcast. Meghan Angley, Jesse Montano.
We'll end the pod with the CMAC interview.
Perfect.
So we'll have that go right after this. Yep.
We'll let you hear from Chris McFarland.
Everyone, I think everyone who's stayed.
Okay, perfect.
Anything else coming down the wire?
Today, yeah, we made one minor league trade that'll be announced shortly.
Is that all?
That's all.
Was this deadline more of, I guess in terms of today, more about the lack of deals that were maybe out there, or just nothing that piqued your guys' interest?
Well, I think there were things that piqued our interest. I think it was just finding the right fit, whether it's trade assets going back or draft pick capital or things like that. I think that was sort of the challenge. I think we viewed our trade deadline probably going back over the last 3 or 4 weeks. And I think, some of the deals we made were things we're excited about. So,
Was there anything out there that maybe you guys wanted to get done further up in the lineup that you weren't able to?
well, we looked at all options, things that encompass forwards, centers, defense, and we just couldn't find a match today.
Yeah.
We were able to find a match the other day with Wash on Lars Eller and a few weeks ago on Matt Nieto, and I think last weekend some goalie depth with Keith Kincaid. So we're really excited about Lars. That was something we wanted to get, some center depth. We weren't sort of focused on first line, second line, third line. It was just we wanted to get a good player, preferably in the middle six if we could, and we think we did that with Lars. And to an extent, Matt Nieto.
At what point here in the last little bit did you sort of know that you weren't doing anything else at the NHL level?
I would say probably about 5 minutes before the deadline.
Do you know the player you're acquiring, is that someone who could swing up to the NHL at some point, or?
Yes.
Okay. And then is with this deadline, I know we talked about when we talked earlier this week, like you were hoping to maybe have a little more clarity on Dave and EJ. Have you gotten that clarity? Do you know where they're at?
I certainly don't know where they're at in terms of return to play. I know where they're at. I think you guys obviously they're in rehab protocol.
Yeah.
Gabe's starting to skate, and I think you guys see that. We'll get a further update on EJ next week.
Okay.
And then what's the word on Darren Helm? Is there a possibility of him playing again? Is he closer? Is he farther?
We certainly hope so, but again, no definitive timeline. But we certainly hope that he'll be able to rejoin us at some point.
Chris, Avalanche came back this season after having some complications with that surgically repaired ankle. Are there any concerns long-term about that ankle and what his health might be?
No.
How much did not knowing whether or not EJ or Gabe would be out for the rest of the regular season maybe limit what you were able to do cap space wise?
Well, it doesn't really limit it. I think the importance of Gabe is the importance of Gabe, right? Like there's no player that we can add to our lineup that can match what he brings. You guys have all watched him play. He's a fantastic hockey player. He's our leader, both on and off the ice. So, he's a power forward that contributes in every facet of our game, right? 5-on-5, power play, penalty kill, intangibles. So his recovery is top priority. That can be the biggest boost for us. So we're hopeful for that.
Was the partial salary Zeller sort of at the time a thought of maybe there could be more moves that you could make, or was it more of a if Gabe or EJ
No,
return,
I think it's just common, right, at this time of year, right? If you want, for us to pay that price, it was a steep draft pick price. Washington got a really good pick for a good hockey player, right? A solid veteran, a big body in the middle of the ice. And, if we were able to find another deal, we'd want as much space as possible. So I think that match made sense, but we weren't able to find, obviously another deal. But you want to be prepared just in case you do, right?
I know this team on paper, you'll go to bat for it, but given the injuries and kind of the uncertainty with those guys, just how confident are you in this team's depth and the ability to go through that 2-month grind?
Well, I think really confident. I mean, if you look at what they've battled through and grinded through all year, and to be in a position where we're at, I mean, I think their play and where we are in the standings speaks volume of the confidence that not only they feel, but we feel. Yes, obviously injuries are a part of the game, and they've been a challenge for us and our group all year, but in terms of the confidence of what we have in them, it's as high as it's ever been. I mean, it's a testament to what they've done that we're in this position to have a playoff spot right now. Obviously, we have more work to do, but we're very confident in this group.
Speaking of the injuries, you've had to use a lot of players this year. Are you pretty happy with what you've seen from some of the AHL guys that have come up?
Absolutely. Those guys. That's a tough thing to step into a lineup where winning is the number one goal, right? And they have to come in and prove to Coach Bednar and the staff that they can earn their trust and continue to get minutes. And whether it's been Brad Hunt or Ben Myers and most of the foodies of the world, earlier in the year, and Anton Bleed and England, they've done a nice job for us. They've filled in admirably. This is a tough league, and those are in some cases very young players, and Brad Hunt's been around the block a little bit, so they get it and they get a taste of NHL action, and they're around our locker room, so there's a lot of pluses that can come for those players, but they've done a good job for us, and we're going to continue to need some of them, as we move along here and down the stretch and hopefully into the playoffs.
Go ahead.
Kevin McDonald is a new face to this organization overseeing the Eagles. What has the relationship with him been like? How has it been different maybe from years past, especially around the time of the deadline and maybe advocating for the Eagles' needs?
Well, Kevin's very experienced. He's been around a long time, going back to his days with the Rangers and then a long time with the Blues. He's been involved in pro scouting and minor league operations for a long time. Certainly was spoiled with Craig Billington the last number of years, and they're very similar in that they're both very passionate about the American Hockey League and the development of our young players. Both very hands-on. So Kevin's been a huge help in that regard for us, and in his passion for what's going on down the road and seeing the young players and get a chance here. There's always a feel-good feeling for when you're day-to-day with those guys. You blood, sweat, and tears with the Avs, right? But you also blood, sweat, and tears with those players who are trying to get to the NHL. So he's been awesome.
Curtis, just a big picture question. Last summer, Josh Kroenke said that plans were in the works to build a new practice facility for the Avalanche and the Nuggets, but with no real details. Yep. I'm just curious, what do you need in a new practice facility? Where would you like it to be located? And do you have any timeline on when it might be built?
No, I don't have any, that would be awesome, but I trust our ownership group immensely for million and one different reasons. I think starting last year with the renovations at Ball, I think you guys have all seen the locker room and then some of the other stuff in the hallway there that's gone on. That's been massive for us in our group and something we're very proud of. And I know whatever they come up with and whenever that is in the future, it's going to be grade A, first class. So.
Gotcha, but at this point you don't know when that
will I personally do not.
Oh. Yes. You touched on Lars Eller briefly. I guess when did he kind of start to become a real possibility, and what did you like about what he brings?
Well, I don't know. Was it Tuesday or Wednesday that we? Yeah, I think it's a player that we touched base with Washington, a few days before type of thing, and And obviously Lars is a decorated player in this league. He's a veteran, big body centerman that's been a third line player, certainly around winning. Washington's been a premier franchise. They've been a team that's gone to battle for years and years and years in the East and has gone far. So I think Lars adds that veteran experience, that defensive presence that can kill penalties, take face-offs, and kind of fill in, in the bottom six in a variety of ways. There's certainly going to be nothing that he hasn't seen over the course of his long career and playoff tested battles, in the Eastern Conference. So I think he brings just a wealth of experience in the middle of the ice that I think will be pretty valuable for us down the stretch. So we put him in a tough spot the other night, landing as late as he did, and then jumping right in with no practices, no system, real touches. So he had a good day yesterday, and I think he'll have a good role for us down the stretch. So we're counting on him.
You guys word out that stop Rydal. Is that something you can confirm?
Yeah, I think I can. We traded Anton Bleed for centerman Gustav Rydal from the Rangers, and I think we're excited about Rydal. He's an experienced centerman from Sweden. I think he's 27, 28. We think he's going to be a real good depth add for us that brings experience as a checking type player, good speed, good size. Anton Bleed did a fantastic job for us. He's a ball of energy. He plays the game hard. He's very competitive. I think we just had a little bit more of a need in the middle of the ice.
And then for someone like that who's I think he just came over from Sweden this season, is that someone that you guys have scouted in the past, or is that strictly this year you guys have gotten from?
Oh no, God no. Our scouts in Sweden, would know Rydal. He's played in the Swedish Elite League for many, many years. He was a guy that was signed as a European free agent last year that would have had a number of teams kicking tires on him, and was a guy that we certainly know well. So we're excited. I believe the plan is for him to fly tonight to Colorado, and we'll get him to Loveland tomorrow or tonight, and he'll hopefully make his debut, and we'll get him system oriented, and then see where it goes from there.
Is that related to the health of Galchenyuk or Maltsev?
Good question. I think Maltsev is on the ice and starting. His rehab is starting to pick up steam, and I think Gally is doing better. So I think it would Meghan. I think it was just more. We wanted depth in the middle for both places as we both, hopefully are pushing towards the playoffs.
This is more future one of the top scorers over in Russia. Have you guys had discussions with him about potentially coming?
Our development staff stays in touch. Our guys are Miro Zalisak in Europe is a guy that monitors Nikolai very, very well. He's one of our top prospects, so he's a guy that at some point we hope to have a conversation about.
There's a couple more guys who's got a flight to catch.
Have you guys looked at all at the possibility of adding Sean Behrens to the NHL roster for defensive depth closer to the playoff run?
Sean, again, a top prospect. His focus is on DU right now. He's a guy that obviously he's here. He's the easiest prospect for us to keep tabs on, and we're very excited about him. And at the appropriate time at the end of the year, we'll touch base with Sean on sort of a pro plan, whether that's in the near future or one more year.
The only draft pick you traded this season in all the, I think, 4 deals was a second-round pick in 2025. How, I guess, especially after last deadline and kind of leading into last season when you traded a lot of picks, how important was it to you guys to not give up draft capital?
I don't think it was something that we're not moving draft capital. I think it's something that we've talked about, right? We paid a lot of picks and prospects last year in an effort to make that team as deep and as possible, and fortunately our guys found a way to get the job done. We entertained moving picks this year, but it had to have made sense, and we just weren't able to find the right deals that made sense. It wasn't from a lack of trying. It wasn't from a we're not moving picks standpoint. It just had to make sense.
Good, guys.